"My apologies," she began, flustered, before freezing as she met the piercing gray eyes of the Duke of Blackhurst. "The fault is entirely mine, madam," he replied, his voice a deep, resonant melody. For a moment, brief yet undeniable, his gaze lingered on her face, causing her heart to skip a beat. "Miss Harrington," she supplied, offering a curtsy. "Miss Harrington," he repeated, as if committing the name to memory. Then, with a formal bow, he continued on his way. It was a fleeting encounter, one that might easily fade into the background of the evening. Yet, Isadora couldn't shake the sensation that the Duke's eyes followed her across the room. Later, as the orchestra began a waltz, Isadora prepared to retreat into the shadows. But then, a familiar voice spoke at her shoulder. "Miss Harrington, might I have the honor of this dance?" The ballroom seemed to still as the Duke of Blackhurst extended his hand to the most unexpected woman imaginable. Isadora felt 100 stunned gazes upon her. "Your Grace," she began, her voice barely audible. "I fear you have mistaken me for someone else." "I am not in the habit of making mistakes, Miss Harrington," he replied, a hint of a smile gracing his lips. "The waltz awaits. Will you do me the honor?" 20 years of social conditioning urged her to decline, to spare them both the inevitable whispers. Yet, something in his unwavering gaze compelled her to place her gloved hand in his. "The honor is mine, Your Grace." As he led her onto the floor, the whispers erupted like a swarm of bees. The Duke of Blackhurst, who had refused to dance with the season's beauties, was leading Miss Isadora Harrington, 40 and unmarried, in a waltz. "You realize, of course, that you have just scandalized the entire assembly," Isadora murmured. "Have I?" he replied, seemingly unconcerned as his hand settled at her waist. "I was under the impression I was merely dancing with the most interesting woman in the room." The music began, and Isadora found herself swept into the dance with a grace she had not experienced in years. The Duke led with confident precision, their steps perfectly matched, creating the illusion they had danced together countless times. "You dance beautifully, Miss Harrington," he observed. "Practice, Your Grace," she replied, "though I confess it has been some time since I was last invited to waltz." "Then the gentlemen of the ton have demonstrated a remarkable lack of judgment." Isadora laughed, a soft, genuine sound that drew even more stares. "You are either exceedingly kind or deliberately provocative, Your Grace. I have yet to determine which. Perhaps both," he conceded, guiding her through a turn with effortless skill. "Tell me, Miss Harrington, do you enjoy these affairs?" "They serve their purpose," she answered diplomatically. "That is not what I asked." His directness unsettled her. It had been years since anyone had looked at her with such focused attention, as though her thoughts and feelings were worthy of consideration. "No," she admitted finally. "I find them rather tedious, but one must maintain appearances." "Indeed," he murmured, and for a moment she glimpsed something in his expression, a fleeting shadow of understanding that suggested he too wore a mask for society's benefit. As the waltz ended, the Duke escorted her to the edge of the ballroom. Before taking his leave, he bent slightly, his voice a low murmur near her ear. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Harrington. It was, without question, the highlight of an otherwise unbearable evening." Then he was gone, moving through the crowd with that peculiar combination of authority and detachment, leaving Isadora to face the tide of curious acquaintances, all eager to know what the Duke could possibly have said to the spinster of Harrington House. In the carriage returning home, Edward regarded his sister with poorly concealed curiosity. "Well," he prompted, "will you not tell me what transpired between you and Blackhurst?" Isadora gazed out at the lamplit streets of London. "We danced, Edward. Nothing more. The most eligible man in England does not simply dance with anyone, Isadora, particularly not when he has refused the hand of every debutante this season." She turned to face her brother, her expression thoughtful. Perhaps he was merely being kind. Edward snorted. "Blackhurst is many things, wealthy, powerful, respected, but kind has never been among his known qualities." The man has a heart of stone, if the rumors are to be believed. Isidora returned her gaze to the window, her reflection a ghost against the darkness. Then perhaps, she said softly, the rumors are wrong. Back at Harrington House, as her lady's maid prepared her for bed, Isidora caught sight of herself in the mirror. The face that looked back at her was neither young nor beautiful by society's standards. The bloom of youth had faded, leaving fine lines and a certain gravity. Yet, for the first time in years, she wondered if there was something still worthy of notice, something that had caught the eye of the most discerning man in England, if only for a single waltz. Foolishness. She chided herself, dismissing the thought. A man like the Duke did not seriously consider women like her. Whatever his reasons, it was surely a fleeting caprice, forgotten by morning. Little did she know that across London, in his opulent study, the Duke sat with a glass of brandy, contemplating the discovery he had made. A woman whose intelligent eyes and quiet dignity had, in a single dance, intrigued him more than all the bright young things of the season. The following morning dawned gray and drizzly, a fitting backdrop to Isidora's reflections. She sat at her desk, composing a letter to her sister in Hampshire, almost convincing herself that the previous night had been an aberration, until the butler appeared. "A delivery for you, Miss Harrington," he announced with a hint of surprise. The footman behind him carried an arrangement of deep crimson roses, so abundant they nearly obscured his face. As he placed the crystal vase on a table, Isidora stared in bewilderment. "There must be some mistake," she began. "No, miss," the butler replied, extending a small card. The messenger was most specific. With trembling fingers, Isidora took the card. In bold, masculine handwriting was written, "To brighten a dreary London morning, Blackhurst." "Heavens above," she whispered, the card nearly slipping from her fingers. The butler cleared his throat. "Will there be a response, Miss Harrington?" Not at present," she managed, staring at the roses as if they might vanish. When the servants had withdrawn, Isidora approached the flowers, inhaling their fragrance. In all her 40 years, no gentleman had ever sent her flowers, not even during her debut season. "What game is he playing?" she murmured, touching a velvet petal. Her contemplation was interrupted by her sister-in-law, Charlotte, Countess of Westbridge, who burst into the room. "Is it true?" Charlotte demanded. "Did the Duke truly send you roses?" Isidora sighed. "News travels quickly. The servants talk, especially when something unprecedented occurs," Charlotte replied, circling the arrangement. "Isidora, these must have cost a fortune." "I'm sure it's merely a courtesy after our dance," Isidora said, attempting to sound dismissive. Charlotte gave her a shrewd look. "The Duke does not dance with spinsters, nor does he send them roses as a courtesy. Something very strange is happening." Before Isidora could respond, the butler appeared again. "Lord Westbridge requests Miss Harrington's presence in the study." Downstairs, Edward paced before the fireplace, his expression troubled. He stopped when Isidora entered. "I've just come from my club," he began. "The entire town is talking about nothing but you and Blackhurst." Isidora sank into a chair. "Surely there are more important matters." "Not in London during the season," Edward replied grimly. "Particularly not when the most sought-after bachelor singled out a spinster," Isidora finished, her voice calm despite the sting. "You need not mince words, Edward. I am well aware of my status." Her brother looked contrite. "Forgive me. I only meant that it is unusual and people are curious. Blackhurst has rejected countless eligible young ladies. Why should he suddenly show interest in someone so manifestly unsuitable?" Isidora finished for him. "I assure you, I have asked myself the same question." Edward knelt beside her, taking her hand. "Isidora, I worry for you. If Blackhurst is playing some sort of cruel game, then I shall be no worse off than I am now," she replied softly. Her brother studied her face. "You find him intriguing, don't you?" Isidora withdrew her hand. "I found our brief conversation refreshingly direct, nothing more, and now he has sent roses, which is flattering, but hardly indicative of serious intent. "Be careful," Edward warned, rising. "Blackhurst may be the most eligible man in England, but he is not known for his warmth. Some say he ended his last engagement because Lady Eleanor Brinsley once laughed too loudly at dinner." Isidora raised an eyebrow. "Gossip, Edward? I thought better of you." "Not gossip, concern," he corrected. "You have built a life of dignity despite society's cruelties. I would not see you hurt by a man incapable of appreciating your worth." The conversation lingered in Isidora's mind as she prepared for the Harringtons' annual visit to the Royal Academy exhibition. It was a family tradition, one of the few social occasions where her status as an unmarried woman attracted little notice. She selected a walking dress of deep forest green, a color she favored for its subdued elegance. As her maid arranged her hair, Isidora found herself paying uncharacteristic attention to her appearance, pinching color into her cheeks, and selecting her finest lace collar. "Foolishness?" she murmured again, though with less conviction. At the Royal Academy, the Harrington party moved slowly through the galleries, pausing to admire landscapes and portraits. Isidora had just separated from her family to examine a seascape when a familiar voice spoke beside her. "Turner at his finest, would you not agree, Miss Harrington?" She turned to find the Duke of Blackhurst standing at her elbow, resplendent in a perfectly tailored morning coat. "Your Grace," she acknowledged. "Yes, his understanding of light is unparalleled." "You have an appreciation for art?" he inquired, studying her with the same intensity she remembered from the ball. "I do," she replied simply, "though I claim no expertise, merely an enthusiast's pleasure." "That is refreshing," he said, offering his arm. "Shall we continue? I find most commentary on art tediously affected, but I suspect yours might prove an exception." Aware of the curious glances, Isidora hesitated before placing her hand on his arm. "You risk further scandal, Your Grace. 2 encounters will set tongues wagging." "Let them wag," he replied dismissively. "I have endured society's speculation for years. It holds no terror for me." As they moved through the exhibition, Isidora relaxed into their conversation. The Duke possessed a genuine knowledge of art, formed through travel and study. More surprising was his willingness to listen to her observations, responding with thoughtful comments that built upon her ideas. "You have traveled to Florence, then?" he asked, as they paused before an Italian landscape. "No," she admitted. "My knowledge comes entirely from books and exhibitions. I have never left England." Surprise flickered across his features. "Never? With your evident appreciation." "My circumstances have not permitted extensive travel," she explained simply. The Duke's expression shifted subtly. "A grave oversight. The Uffizi Gallery alone would provide you with a lifetime of contemplation." Before she could respond, they were interrupted by Lady Petton and her daughter, the lovely but vapid Miss Petton. "Your Grace," Lady Petton exclaimed, her surprise poorly concealed. "What an unexpected pleasure. Penelope and I were just admiring the Reynolds portrait." "Lady Petton," the Duke acknowledged coolly. "Miss Pemberton, I trust you are enjoying the exhibition." "Oh, immensely," gushed Miss Petton, edging closer to him, while pretending Isidora did not exist. "Though I confess, these historical subjects can be so dreary. I much prefer more romantic themes." The Duke's expression remained impassive. "Indeed, Miss Harrington and I were just discussing Turner's revolutionary approach to light and atmosphere. She has made several observations that I found quite illuminating." All eyes turned to Isidora, who felt a flush rise to her cheeks. "How interesting," Lady Petton replied, her smile tightening. "I had no idea Miss Harrington harbored such academic interests. Few people take the time to discover what lies beneath the surface," the Duke replied, his tone carrying a subtle edge. An awkward silence followed, broken when Edward appeared, his expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Isidora, Mother is requesting your company," he said, nodding formally to the group. With a curtsy to the Duke and a nod to the Pettons, Isidora allowed herself to be led away. She could feel the Duke's gaze following her. That is twice in 2 days, Edward murmured. And now the roses. People are beginning to talk. People always talk, Edward, she replied wearily. Not about you like this. The remainder of the afternoon passed in a blur of strained conversation and curious glances. By the time the Harrington party returned home, Isadora felt emotionally exhausted. Yes, frankly it is, Hartwell replied. You've always been so controlled, so certain of your path. Richard gazed into the fire, his expression thoughtful. Perhaps it is time for a different path. You realize what you're contemplating? Hartwell pressed. The scandal would be unprecedented. A duke, particularly one of your standing, does not marry a spinster with no fortune and no connections beyond a minor. I said nothing of marriage, Richard replied, though the slight tension in his jaw belied his casual tone. Hartwell laughed without humor. My friend, you have publicly singled out a respectable unmarried woman of good family. You've sent her flowers and books. You've requested permission to call. Either you are contemplating marriage, or you are behaving in a manner most would consider dishonorable. The Duke's expression hardened. You know me better than that. I do, Hartwell conceded. Which is why your sudden interest in Miss Harrington is so baffling. You have refused the hand of every suitable young lady presented to you for years, citing trivial flaws. Now you appear captivated by a woman who, by society's reckoning, is thoroughly on the shelf. Society, Richard said coldly, can go hang. Hartwell sighed, recognizing the implacable resolve that had made his friend one of the most formidable men in England. Very well, but tread carefully, Richard. Miss Harrington has undoubtedly endured years of subtle cruelty from the ton. If you pursue her only to withdraw, the consequences for her would be devastating. For a moment, something like uncertainty flickered in the Duke's gray eyes, an expression so rare that Hartwell nearly missed it. Then it was gone, replaced by the cool determination that was the Duke's hallmark. I have no intention of withdrawing, Richard stated with quiet finality. Miss Harrington has waited 40 years to be properly seen. I intend to ensure she never feels invisible again. You must be aware that your attention has caused quite a stir. A fleeting smile, genuine and disarming, softened the austerity of his features. Good, he murmured, a hint of mischief dancing in his eyes. The tongue has grown far too comfortable in its rigid expectations. A little disruption is long overdue. Is that what I am? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. A disruption to the established order? The Duke studied her face, his gaze piercing, as though he sought to unravel the secrets hidden beneath the surface. You are many things, Miss Harrington, he said, his voice a low rumble that resonated through the room. But a mere instrument of social rebellion is not one of them. The butler reappeared, bearing a silver tray laden with tea, providing Isadora with a brief, welcome respite from the intensity of his gaze. As she poured, her hands trembling slightly, she was acutely aware of the domestic intimacy of the scene, something she had witnessed countless times between her married sisters and their husbands, but had never, in her 40 years, experienced herself. You enjoyed the book? The Duke inquired, accepting his cup with a nod of thanks, drawing her back to safer conversational waters. Very much, she replied, relaxing imperceptibly. The color plates are magnificent. Thank you for such a thoughtful gift. It seemed fitting, he said, his eyes thoughtful. Your observations yesterday revealed a genuine appreciation that deserves cultivation. Isadora sipped her tea, gathering the courage to voice the question that had haunted her since the Peton ball. Your Grace, she began, her voice gaining strength. Forgive my directness, but I must ask, why have you singled me out for these attentions? Richard set down his cup, the clink a sharp sound in the quiet room. His expression was serious, devoid of the teasing light that had briefly flickered there. Because, he began, his voice resonating with sincerity. In a sea of artifice, you stand as a beacon of authenticity. Because when you speak, you say what you mean, rather than what you believe I wish to hear. Because your eyes reflect a depth of thought and feeling that I find utterly compelling. The The simple honesty of his answer stole the breath from Isidora's lungs. No man had ever spoken to her with such straightforward admiration, not even in her youth, when she had still dared to harbor dreams of marriage. "I am 40 years old, Your Grace," she reminded him, her voice surprisingly steady despite the torrent of emotions his words had unleashed within her. "I have no fortune, no particular beauty, and no accomplishments beyond those expected of any gentlewoman. Surely there are dozens of young ladies more worthy of your interest." "Worthy?" he repeated, a hint of steel edging his voice. A curious choice of words. "Tell me, Miss Harrington, by what measure do you determine a person's worth? By youth, beauty, fortune? These seem remarkably shallow criteria for a woman of your intelligence." Isidora flushed, stung by the implied criticism. "You misunderstand me," she protested. "I meant only that society—" "Society," he interrupted, his tone laced with impatience, "has consistently demonstrated a profound inability to recognize true value. I, however, am not so limited in my perceptions." A charged silence descended upon them, broken only by the soft crackling of the fire in the hearth. The Duke rose and crossed to the window, his tall figure silhouetted against the afternoon light, a portrait of brooding intensity. "Perhaps I should speak plainly," he said, turning back to face her, his gaze unwavering. "I have spent the past 15 years avoiding matrimony, Miss Harrington, because I have never encountered a woman whose company I could envision tolerating for a lifetime until now." Isidora stared at him, certain she had misheard. "Your Grace, if this is some kind of jest—" "I do not jest about matters of such importance," he replied, his expression grave, his voice brooking no argument. "I am well aware that my attention has placed you in an uncomfortable position. Society whispers, your family worries, and you yourself must be uncertain of my intentions." He returned to his seat, leaning forward slightly, his eyes seeking hers. "Allow me to clarify them. I wish to court you, Miss Harrington, with the utmost propriety and respect. If, after a period of better acquaintance, you find my company as agreeable as I find yours, I hope you might consider a more permanent arrangement." Isidora felt as though the floor had vanished beneath her feet, leaving her suspended in a void of disbelief. "You cannot be serious," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I have never been more serious about anything in my life," he replied simply, his gaze unwavering. "The scandal means nothing to me. The disparity in our situations is relevant only if we allow it to be. Your family's expectations are not my concern. I am the head of my house, and answer to no one regarding my choice of bride." His calm dismantling of each unspoken objection left Isidora speechless, her mind reeling. Finally, she managed to articulate the question that lay at the heart of her disbelief. "Why me, Your Grace? After all these years of refusing every eligible match, why would you choose someone society considers thoroughly unmarriageable?" Richard's expression softened, a warmth spreading through his eyes that made her heart skip a beat. "Because when we danced, Miss Harrington," he said, his voice low and intimate, "I felt for the first time that I was in the presence of a woman who saw me. Not the Duke, not the fortune, not the ancient title, but the man beneath all those trappings. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" Before she could respond, the drawing-room door swung open, and Lady Harrington, Isidora's mother, swept into the room, her surprise at finding the Duke of Blackhurst in her drawing-room poorly concealed beneath a veneer of social grace. "Your Grace!" she exclaimed, curtsying deeply, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and calculation. "What an unexpected honor! I do apologize for interrupting." "Not at all, Lady Harrington," Richard replied, rising to bow with effortless charm. "I was just discussing the Royal Academy exhibition with your daughter. Her insights are most illuminating." Lady Harrington's gaze darted back and forth between them, clearly struggling to make sense of the scene before her. "How delightful," she said, her voice tight. "Isidora has always been fond of art, though I fear her observations may lack the sophistication to truly interest someone of your background, Your Grace." Isidora felt a familiar pang at her mother's dismissive tone, a subtle diminishment she had endured for years as her marriage prospects faded. On the contrary, the Duke replied, his voice cooling perceptibly, a hint of steel underlying his words. Miss Harrington's understanding rivals that of many so-called experts of my acquaintance. You must be very proud of her accomplishments. Lady Harrington blinked, clearly unaccustomed to hearing her eldest daughter praised by anyone, let alone one of the most powerful men in England. Yes, of course, she stammered, fanning herself vigorously. Isidora has always been studious. The Duke turned back to Isidora, ignoring the obvious discomfort his presence had created. Miss Harrington, he continued, his voice once again warm and engaging, might I prevail upon you to accompany me to the conservatory at Kew Gardens tomorrow? The tropical specimens are particularly fine this season. Aware of her mother's widening eyes, Isidora hesitated only briefly before nodding. I should like that very much, Your Grace. Excellent. Shall we say 11 o'clock? I will send my carriage. With that, he bowed to both ladies and took his leave, his departure leaving a vacuum of stunned silence in its wake. Isidora, Lady Harrington breathed, when the front door had closed firmly behind him. What in heaven's name is happening? First the roses, now a private call and an invitation to Kew. The Duke of Blackhurst is courting you. It would appear so, Mother, Isidora replied, still struggling to process the reality of the situation herself. Lady Harrington sank into a chair, fanning herself with renewed vigor. But why, after all these years of being overlooked, to suddenly attract the attention of the most eligible bachelor in England? It defies all understanding. Isidora winced at her mother's artless candor. Thank you for that assessment, Mother. Lady Harrington had the grace to look abashed. Forgive me, my dear. I did not mean, that is to say, you have always been accomplished and well-bred, of course, but at your age. Yes, Mother, I am quite aware of my age, Isidora interrupted with uncharacteristic sharpness. As I believe is the Duke. But what can he possibly want? Lady Harrington persisted, bewilderment etched into every line of her face. Isidora rose, suddenly weary of the conversation. Perhaps, Mother, she said softly. He wants what any man seeks in a potential wife, companionship, understanding and mutual respect. At your age, Lady Harrington repeated, seemingly unable to move past this central fact. It's unprecedented. Many things about the Duke appear to be unprecedented, Isidora replied, her voice laced with a hint of amusement. If you'll excuse me, I believe I shall rest before dinner. Tomorrow promises to be eventful. As she climbed the stairs to her bedchamber, Isidora's mind whirled with conflicting emotions. Disbelief warred with a dangerous, fragile hope that she had thought long dead. Could the Duke truly be serious in his intentions? Or was this, as Edward feared, some incomprehensible game whose rules she did not understand? In the privacy of her room, Isidora sat at her dressing table, studying her reflection with new eyes. The face that looked back at her was handsome rather than beautiful, strong features softened by intelligent eyes and a generous mouth. Time had etched fine lines at the corners of those eyes and across her brow, but had also bestowed a certain dignity, a gravitas that her younger self had lacked. Could he truly see something worthwhile in this face? She whispered to her reflection, searching for the answer in the depths of her own eyes. Sleep proved elusive that night. Isidora lay awake, replaying the Duke's words in her mind, searching for hidden meanings or subtle mockery, and finding none. His manner had been direct, his gaze sincere, his intentions stated with a clarity that left little room for misinterpretation. Yet still she doubted. 20 years of watching from the sidelines as other women were chosen, courted, and wed had left deep scars on her heart. The idea that she, overlooked, unmarriageable Isidora Harrington, might have captured the attention of the most sought-after bachelor in England seemed more fantasy than reality. Morning brought no respite from her confusion, as her maid helped her dress for the promised excursion to Kew Gardens, selecting a walking gown of deep teal that complemented her coloring. Isadora found herself trembling with a combination of anticipation and dread. "You look lovely, miss," her maid assured her, arranging a modest hat atop Isadora's carefully styled hair. "Thank you, Bennett," Isadora replied, managing a small smile. "Though I fear lovely may be an overstatement at my age." "Nonsense," the maid replied loyally, her eyes twinkling. "There's more to beauty than youth, and if I may be so bold, miss, the Duke seems to have recognized that fact." "Your Grace," called Lady Winfield, a notorious gossip whose daughter had failed to secure the Duke's interest during the previous season. "What an unexpected pleasure to find you at Kew on this fine morning." Her gaze moved to Isadora, and a look of poorly concealed disdain crossed her features. "And Miss Harrington as well. How unusual." The Duke's expression cooled perceptibly, his jaw tightening. "Lady Winfield, ladies. Miss Harrington and I were just discussing the remarkable architectural achievements of Decimus Burton. You'll forgive us if we continue our tour." Without waiting for a response, he guided Isadora toward a less crowded section of the glass house, his hand warm and reassuring at the small of her back. "I apologize for the interruption," he murmured, his voice laced with irritation. "It seems we cannot escape society's eyes, even here." "It is to be expected," Isadora replied pragmatically. "Your movements are always of interest, and my presence at your side is noteworthy." "Because of your age?" he asked bluntly, cutting through the usual social niceties. Isadora blinked at his directness. "Yes," she admitted after a moment, her voice tinged with a hint of melancholy. "Among other factors, such as my lack of beauty, fortune, or particularly distinguished family connections," she replied honestly. "The fact that I have been considered firmly on the shelf for at least a decade." The Duke's expression hardened, a flash of anger in his gray eyes. "The tongue's assessment of worth is remarkably shallow. Beauty fades, fortunes rise and fall, and distinguished families often produce undistinguished progeny. As for being on the shelf," he made no attempt to hide his disdain for the phrase, "I find that particular social construct both arbitrary and idiotic." Despite herself, Isadora laughed, a genuine sound of surprise and delight that echoed pleasantly in the humid air, a sound that felt like a melody long unsung. "Your Grace," she said, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "I believe you may be the first person I've encountered who sees it that way." His expression softened at her laughter, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Then the rest of society is blind. Tell me, Miss Harrington, if you had not been constrained by convention, what would you have done with your life?" The question caught her off guard, pulling her from the familiar script of social expectation. I'm not sure I understand." "If marriage had not been the only acceptable path for a woman of your standing," he clarified, his eyes searching hers, "what pursuits might have captured your interest?" Isadora considered the question thoughtfully as they continued their stroll among the exotic foliage, the scent of damp earth and blooming orchids filling the air. "I would have liked to travel," she said finally, her voice gaining strength as she voiced a long-held secret. "To see the art and architecture I've only read about, to experience different cultures and landscapes firsthand." "Where would you go first?" he prompted, his tone genuinely interested, as if he were truly invested in her dreams. "Italy, I think," she replied, her eyes lighting with enthusiasm, a spark of youthful longing igniting within her. "Florence, Rome, Venice, to see the works of the Renaissance masters in their original settings." She paused, lost in the vision. "And after Italy, Greece perhaps, Egypt. The ancient civilizations have always fascinated me." She stopped abruptly, looking somewhat embarrassed, as though she had revealed too much. "I sound rather like a schoolgirl with fanciful dreams." "Not at all," the Duke countered firmly, his voice filled with conviction. "You sound like someone with a mind eager for knowledge and experience, qualities I find infinitely more attractive than the vapid accomplishments society prizes in its young ladies." They had reached a secluded corner of the glass house, sheltered from curious eyes by a stand of bamboo. The Duke turned to face her, his expression serious, The playful light vanished from his eyes. "Miss Harrington, Isadora, if I may," he said, his voice low and resonant. "I wish to be entirely clear about my intentions. I am not playing a game. I am not seeking to cause a scandal. I am pursuing you because, in the brief time of our acquaintance, you have engaged my mind and intrigued my heart in ways no other woman has managed in 38 years of existence." He took her gloved hand in his touch sending a jolt of electricity through her veins. "I recognize that my attention places you in an uncomfortable position. Society will whisper, your family will worry, and you yourself may doubt the sincerity of my regard. But I ask only that you grant me the opportunity to demonstrate that regard through continued acquaintance." Isadora looked up into his face, the strong, aristocratic features that had launched 1,000 matrimonial campaigns, and saw nothing but earnest intent in his gray eyes, no hint of deception or malice. "Your Grace, Richard," he corrected gently, a hint of warmth returning to his voice. "When we are not in formal company, I should like to hear my name on your lips." "Richard?" she repeated, the intimate address sending a tremor through her voice, a thrill of something she couldn't quite name. "I fear you may be courting disappointment. I am not young, not beautiful in the conventional sense." "You are beautiful to me," he interrupted, his thumb tracing a gentle pattern on the back of her hand, his eyes conveying a sincerity that stole her breath away. "Your intelligence shines in your eyes. Your dignity lends grace to every movement. Your smile, when you deign to bestow it, transforms your entire countenance." The remainder of their visit to Kew passed in a pleasant haze for Isadora, the world around her shimmering with a newfound light. The private luncheon proved delightful, with conversation flowing easily between discussions of art, literature, and philosophy. The Duke, Richard, revealed himself to be widely read and thoughtful, with opinions that challenged rather than merely echoed the prevailing wisdom of their class. As he handed her back into his carriage for the return journey to Harrington House, he asked quietly, his eyes searching hers, "Might I call on you again tomorrow?" "Yes," Isadora replied without hesitation, surprising herself with the readiness of her answer, the years of hesitation and doubt melting away in the warmth of his gaze. "I should like that very much." His smile, warm and genuine, stayed with her long after she had returned home to face her family's curious questioning about the outing, a beacon of hope in the gathering dusk. That evening, Edward cornered her in the library, his expression troubled, his brow furrowed with concern. "Isadora, what exactly is transpiring between you and Blackhurst? The entire town is talking." "I am not entirely certain myself," she admitted, selecting a volume from the shelf to avoid meeting her brother's concerned gaze, though her heart betrayed her with a telltale flutter. "He has expressed interest in a continued acquaintance." "Interest?" Edward repeated skeptically, his voice laced with disbelief. "Isadora, the man is courting you openly and without apology. It is unprecedented." She finally turned to face him, her chin lifting with a newfound confidence. "Do you find it so impossible to believe that someone might genuinely desire my company, Edward?" Her brother had the grace to look abashed, his gaze softening. "Of course not. You are intelligent, kind, and possessed of more substance than most women half your age. But Blackhurst, his reputation for fastidiousness, for impossible standards, the fact that he has rejected every suitable match for 15 years, only to suddenly show interest in—" He stopped abruptly, searching for a delicate way to express his concerns. "In a spinster of 40, Isadora finished for him, her voice steady despite the sting of the truth. "Yes, it is unexpected. I have said as much to him directly." "And what was his response?" Edward pressed, his eyes searching hers for any sign of hurt or disappointment. A small smile touched her lips as she recalled Richard's words in the Palm House, his voice resonating with sincerity. "He said that society's assessment of worth is remarkably shallow, and that he finds the concept of being on the shelf both arbitrary and idiotic." Edward's eyebrows rose in surprise. "That does not sound like the Blackhurst I have heard described at my club." "Perhaps," Isadora suggested gently, her eyes sparkling with a newfound hope, The Duke the tongue believes it knows is not the man himself, but rather the title they all covet. Her brother studied her face intently, his gaze lingering on the faint flush on her cheeks. You like him? He observed, sounding faintly astonished. I find his company stimulating, she acknowledged carefully, her heart pounding in her chest. His conversation is intelligent, his opinions thoughtful, and his manner refreshingly direct. Edward ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration he had maintained since boyhood. Isadora, I only wish to protect you from potential hurt. If Blackhurst is sincere, then I could not be more delighted for you. But if this is some passing fancy on his part, then I shall endure it as I have endured everything else, she replied with quiet dignity, a steely glint in her eyes. But Edward, what if it is not? What if after all these years I have encountered someone who sees me, truly sees me for who I am? Would you have me reject that? London, kneeling before her, offering her not only his hand but his heart. A heart she had feared was forever closed to love, yet now beat with an intensity that mirrored her own. Had she been wrong all these years? Had the world simply been waiting for her to open herself to the possibility of a love so profound it could redefine her existence? For 40 years, Isadora Harrington had lived a life carefully shielded from hope, a quiet existence shadowed by society's indifference. But what if, just what if, she had been denying herself this possibility out of fear? Over the following weeks, London society became captivated by the unfolding romance between the Duke of Blackhurst and Miss Isadora Harrington. Daily, the Duke graced Harrington House with his presence, tokens of affection arriving in the form of flowers and thoughtfully chosen books. Together, they attended exhibitions, concerts, and even the opera, seemingly immune to the whispers and stares that followed their every move. For Isadora, after decades spent in the shadows, the sudden attention was both exhilarating and daunting. Every detail, her gowns, her hairstyle, even her conversation, was now subject to scrutiny and, at times, cruel commentary. Whispers circulated, fueled by jealousy and disbelief. One evening, as Charlotte helped Isadora prepare for the theater, she repeated a rumor. Lady Winfield believes it must be a wager, she confided, that Hartwell challenged Blackhurst to court the most unlikely woman in London. Isadora paused, her hands stilling as she fastened her earrings. And what did you say to that? Charlotte's response was sharp, unusual for her gentle nature. I told her that if the Duke had made such a wager, he would have chosen someone truly objectionable, perhaps Lady Winfield herself. Honestly, Isadora, the jealousy is palpable. Half the mothers in London have spent years throwing their daughters at Blackhurst without success, and now he has chosen you. It's driving them to distraction. Chosen is perhaps too strong a word, Isadora cautioned, though her heart warmed at her sister-in-law's unwavering support. He enjoys my company, that is all. Charlotte snorted delicately. A man like the Duke of Blackhurst does not escort a woman to the opera merely because he enjoys her company. He is courting you, Isadora. The only question is when he will make his intentions official. Isadora turned from the mirror, her expression troubled. Charlotte, do you not find it strange that after all these years of being virtually invisible to society, I should suddenly attract the attention of the most eligible man in England? Her sister-in-law studied her thoughtfully. What I find strange is that it took someone of Blackhurst's perception to recognize your worth when it has been evident to your family all along. The simple sincerity of the statement brought unexpected tears to Isadora's eyes. Thank you, she whispered, a healing warmth spreading through her. That evening at the Royal Theatre, Isadora found herself acutely aware of the opera glasses trained on their box. The performance of Verdi's La Traviata played out before them, but the real drama, she suspected, was unfolding in their private space, where the Duke of Blackhurst sat in close proximity to a woman 20 years past her debut. You seem distracted, Richard observed during the interval, his voice low and intimate. I am sorry, she apologized. It is difficult to focus when one is the subject of such avid observation. His gaze swept the theater, taking note of the many faces turned in their direction. Would you prefer to leave and give them even more to gossip about? She replied with a small, knowing smile. No, I shall endure. Richard's expression darkened. You should not have to endure, Isidora. Not because of society's petty malice. She placed a gloved hand briefly on his arm, a gesture of intimacy that would not have gone unnoticed. Such an invitation will be seen as precisely what it is. He interrupted gently. A clear statement of my regard and intentions. I am weary of the speculation, Isidora. I wish to make my feelings plain not only to you but to all of society. Her heart thundered in her chest. And what are those feelings? In answer, he took her hand and raised it to his lips, his gaze never leaving hers. I believe you know, he said softly. But if you require the words, I shall speak them here and now, regardless of who might witness. Isidora shook her head quickly, overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment. No, not here. Not like this. His expression gentled with understanding. Then say you will come to Blackhurst. Allow me to introduce you to those dearest to me. Let me show you the place that has shaped me, for better or worse. The invitation represented a threshold, Isidora knew, a point of no return. If she accepted, she would be inviting both increased scrutiny and potential disappointment. Yet looking into Richard's steady gray eyes, she found she could not refuse. Whatever happened, whatever pain might lie ahead, she would not deny herself this chance at happiness. Yes, she said finally, I will come to Blackhurst. His smile, rare and transformative, illuminated his features. You have made me very happy, Isidora, he said simply. Then, with a formal bow that belied the intimacy of the moment, he bid her good night and returned to his carriage. Inside Harrington House, Edward waited, his expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. Well, he prompted, what did Blackhurst have to say for himself tonight? He has invited me to Blackhurst Manor for his spring house party, she replied, still dazed by the invitation. Edward's eyebrows shot up. Good Lord, and you accepted? I did. Her brother studied her intently. Then it appears his intentions are serious indeed. So it would seem. Edward was silent for a long moment. Then he stepped forward and took her hands in his. Isidora, if this is what you want, if Blackhurst is what you want, then you have my full support. Whatever whispers or obstacles society may throw in your path, know that your family stands with you. Tears pricked at Isidora's eyes. Thank you, Edward, she whispered, squeezing his hands gratefully. Her brother cleared his throat, suddenly self-conscious. Yes, well, it's about time someone recognized your worth, even if it had to be the most intimidating man in England. The weekend of the Blackhurst house party arrived with unseasonable warmth, as though spring itself had conspired to make the occasion perfect. Isidora traveled to Kent in Richard's carriage, accompanied by Charlotte. As the carriage crested a hill, Blackhurst Manor came into view, its limestone facade gleaming golden in the afternoon sun. Heavens! Charlotte breathed. It's even grander than they say. Isidora could only nod, momentarily overwhelmed by the reality of what she was doing. Approaching the ancestral seat of one of England's oldest dukedoms as a potential duchess. Yet here she was, responding to an invitation that could have only one meaning. As the carriage rolled to a stop, Richard himself emerged to greet them, descending the steps with an eager stride. Isidora, he said warmly, helping her from the carriage. Welcome to Blackhurst. For a moment they stood gazing at each other, oblivious to the servants or Charlotte. Then, recollecting himself, Richard turned to greet Charlotte with correct, if cooler, courtesy, before escorting them into the entrance hall. The interior of Blackhurst Manor was every bit as impressive as its exterior, yet despite its grandeur, there was a warmth to the house, a sense that it was a home. I've had rooms prepared for you in the East Wing, Richard informed them. The views of the rose garden are particularly fine at this time of year. I thought you might appreciate them, Isidora. The personal consideration touched her deeply. Thank you, Richard. That was most thoughtful. His expression softened at her use of his given name. I shall leave you to rest and refresh yourselves before dinner. The other guests will be arriving throughout the afternoon. As a maid led them to their rooms, Charlotte leaned close to whisper, "Did you see how he looked at you, Isidora? If the man is not in love, I shall eat my best bonnet." Isidora shushed her, though her heart leapt at the observation. Could it be true? Could the Duke of Blackhurst truly love her? The possibility seemed too extraordinary to credit, yet the evidence was increasingly difficult to dismiss. After resting briefly, Isidora began to prepare for dinner, selecting a gown of deep amethyst silk. "You look lovely," Charlotte declared. "Truly, Isidora, I have never seen you look better." Studying her reflection, Isidora had to admit there was a difference in her appearance. Not in her features, but in her expression. There was a light in her eyes that had been absent for years, a confidence in her posture that spoke of renewed hope. As they descended to the drawing room, Isidora was conscious of the scrutiny she would face from Richard's inner circle. These were the people whose judgment mattered to the man who had come to matter deeply to her. Richard came forward immediately to greet them. "Isidora, Charlotte," he said warmly, "allow me to introduce you to my guests." The group was smaller and less intimidating than Isidora had feared. There was Richard's younger sister, Lady Elenina Valamont, a striking woman in her early 30s, and others. To Isidora's surprise, the reception she received was uniformly cordial, with Richard's sister going out of her way to make her feel welcome. "My brother has spoken of little else but you for weeks," Lady Elenina confided. "I was beginning to think you must be some sort of paragon." Isidora laughed softly. "I assure you I am nothing of the sort. Your brother's regard is flattering, but perhaps exaggerated." Lady Eleanor studied her with shrewd blue eyes. "I think not," she said finally. "Richard does not exaggerate, nor does he act on impulse or emotion. If he has singled you out, Miss Harrington, it is because he sees qualities in you that are genuinely exceptional." Before Isidora could respond, dinner was announced, and Richard appeared at her elbow to escort her into the dining room. "My sister has not overwhelmed you, I hope," he murmured. "Elenina can be rather direct." "Not at all," Isidora assured him. "It's refreshing, actually. Directness seems to be a family trait." He smiled down at her, his eyes warm. It was the dinner that followed was unlike any social experience Isidora had ever known. Seated at Richard's right hand, she found herself at the center of genuine, interested conversation. Richard's friends and family engaged her on topics ranging from literature to politics, listening to her opinions with actual attention. Most surprising of all was the way Richard himself deferred to her views, drawing her into discussions, and valuing her contributions in a way she had never experienced in society. "You see," he said softly during a moment when the others were engaged in their own conversations, "this is why I wished you to come to Blackhurst, so that you might see yourself as I see you, not as London society has labeled you, but as the remarkable woman you truly are." The simple sincerity of his words brought warmth to Isidora's cheeks. "You are very kind, Richard." "Not kind," he corrected gently. "Observant and increasingly certain that I have made the right choice." After dinner, the party retired to the music room, where Lady Elenina was prevailed upon to play the pianoforte. As the evening progressed, Isidora found herself drawn into the warm circle of Richard's closest connections, accepted as someone of genuine interest and worth. It was a revelation, this glimpse of what life might be like, freed from the judgments that had defined her existence for so long. Here, she was not the spinster or poor Miss Harrington, but simply Isidora, valued for herself. As the evening drew to a close, Richard escorted her to the foot of the grand staircase, lingering behind the others. "You seem to enjoy yourself," he observed, his voice low and intimate. "Very much," she admitted. "Your friends and family are most welcoming." "They see what I see," he replied simply. Then, glancing around to ensure they were unobserved, he reached for her hand, raising it not to his lips, but pressing it gently against his heart. "Sleep well, Isidora. Tomorrow I should like to show you the grounds, if the weather permits." The gesture carried a weight of tenderness that left her momentarily speechless. "I should like that," she managed finally, withdrawing her hand. "Good night, Richard." As she ascended the staircase, she could feel his gaze following her, warm and steady. In her room, preparing for bed, she found herself humming softly, an unconscious expression of a happiness so unexpected. The following day dawned clear and mild, perfect for the promised tour of the estate. After breakfast, Richard appeared at Isidora's side, offering his arm. "Shall we explore?" he suggested, his eagerness barely concealed. They set out across the immaculate lawns, Richard pointing out features of the landscape. It soon became clear that Blackhurst was not merely a symbol of his rank, but a living entity to which he was deeply connected. "My father saw the estate primarily as a source of revenue," he explained as they paused at the edge of a small lake. "But for me, it has always been more than that. These lands, these people, they are a responsibility, yes, but also a privilege to be part of something that stretches back centuries." "You speak of it with such passion," Isidora observed. "It's clear how much Blackhurst means to you." "Perhaps not," he conceded. "But none, not one, ever looked at me as you do, as though I am a person worthy of genuine interest rather than merely a title to be acquired." His thumbs traced gentle patterns on the backs of her hands, sending shivers up her arms. "As for managing a great household, Blackhurst has run efficiently for centuries under the guidance of capable stewards. What I seek in a wife is not an administrator, but a companion. Someone whose conversation I enjoy, whose opinions I respect, whose presence brings me peace rather than obligation." Isidora's heart quickened at the implication of his words, but still she hesitated. "Richard, you must know how people will talk." "Let them talk," he replied with quiet intensity. "I have never governed my life according to society's expectations, Isidora. I see no reason to begin now, particularly when doing so would deny me the chance at genuine happiness." He released one of her hands to reach into his coat pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box that caused her breath to catch. "I had planned to wait until this evening," he said, his voice betraying nervousness. "But perhaps here, in this place that has witnessed the sweep of centuries, is more fitting." Opening the box, he revealed a magnificent emerald ring surrounded by diamonds. "This belonged to my grandmother, the 5th Duchess," he explained. "A woman of remarkable intelligence and character, who defied convention in her own time. I believe she would approve of my choice." With deliberate care, he slid from the bench to one knee before her, still holding her gaze. "Isidora Harrington, you have brought light into my life, where before there was only duty. You have shown me that true connection is possible, even for someone as guarded as myself. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Isidora stared at him, scarcely able to believe the moment was real. Here was Richard Vallemont, Duke of Blackhurst, the most eligible bachelor in. Richard gathered her into his arms, his kiss a passionate declaration. "I have loved you, Isidora, since that first waltz," he confessed. "Though I scarcely recognized the feeling, it has been so long since I allowed myself to want anything beyond duty." "And now?" she asked. "Now I find myself wanting everything with you. A life, a family, a partnership in every sense of the word. Even if society never quite accepts us." Richard laughed. "Society will adjust. What we build together, Adora, that will be our legacy, far more significant than any gossip." As the carriage rolled through the countryside, Isidora rested her head against her husband's shoulder, marveling at her journey. At 40, she had found not just love, but a partner who valued her for who she was. Richard, in turn, had found a companion whose love awakened his dormant spirit. Together, they would face any challenge, bound by a connection that defied expectation. "I love you, Richard," she whispered. His arm tightened around her. "And I love you, my Duchess, more than I ever thought possible." Years later, the grand ballroom of Blackhurst Manor glittered with candlelight. At the center stood the Duke and Duchess, their expressions serene. "They make a striking couple, do they not?" Lady Elenina observed. The scandal of their match was long forgotten. Society had a short memory when confronted with success. Indeed, Richard's devotion to Isidora had only deepened. A young footman whispered in Isidora's ear, and her face lit with joy. She turned to Richard, conveying news that transformed his reserved expression with delight. With apologies, they slipped from the ballroom. "The nursery, I imagine," Lady Elenina explained. Upstairs, Isidora and Richard stood by the cradle of their 8-month-old son, James, the miracle that had silenced the last skeptics. "He has your eyes," Richard observed. "And your stubbornness," Isidora replied with a laugh. "I too prefer your company to our entire guest list," Richard said, kissing her temple. The nurse withdrew, leaving them alone with their sleeping son. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life," Isidora confessed. "Very real," Richard assured her. "How did I exist for 38 years without you? It seems inconceivable now. We found each other when we were ready, when we had both lived enough to recognize true value." Richard smiled. "The most valuable discovery of my life." Below, music drifted from the ballroom. "We should return to our guests," Isidora murmured. "In a moment," Richard replied, his eyes drinking in her sight. He would stay in this sacred moment, cherishing her and their precious boy. And so they remained, the Duke and his unexpected Duchess, their love story having silenced the whispers and defied convention. They had rewritten the rules, proving that true connection could flourish at any age, that value lay in character, and that love, when genuine, could overcome any expectation. "Happy?" Richard asked. "Beyond anything I ever imagined possible," she replied. Hand in hand, they returned to the glittering ballroom, their love story no longer a scandal, but an inspiration. Dear listener, life, like Isidora and Richard's story, rarely follows the expected path. But it is never too late to find happiness. At 40, society had written Isidora's story, yet her most beautiful chapter was just beginning, not despite her age, but because of it. Perhaps you too have felt invisible, heard whispers that your moment has passed. But remember, authentic connections often come when we have lived enough to know ourselves truly. Your life experience isn't a liability. It's your greatest strength. The right people will recognize and cherish these qualities in you. Rest well, knowing that the most meaningful chapters of your story may still lie ahead. You are seen, you are valued, and you are worthy of every happiness, at every age.